Good morning, everybody. I'd like to acknowledge that we connect with the First Nations communities across our vast regional district. And today we are located on the Kamloops and Secwepemc territory, situated within the unceded ancestral lands of the Secwepemc Nation. The TNRD appreciates the partnership that we have with Kamloops, Secwepemc, and respect the territory and land on which we gather here today. Well, I'd like to bring the Utility Systems Committee meeting to order, and I have no chair's announcements. Is there any additions to the agenda by anyone? Ms. Schaefer? Oh, okay. Now, any oh, I must have to remember to do that. There, are we accepting the minutes of April 21st?
I believe Director Roden would like to speak regarding the additions to the agenda.
Oh, I'm sorry, Barbara, go ahead.
Sorry, that's okay. It's actually regarding the minutes from the previous meeting.
Okay, go ahead.
The first motion there is, it says moved by, seconded by, but there are no names.
Oh, okay. I'm sure Agnes could take a look at that.
We'll take a look at the recording and make sure we enter those. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. That was for the April 21st?
Yes.
Okay. Is there any other discussion from April 21st committee meeting? May I have a motion to accept, please, as amended? Carol and Robin, all in favor? Thank you. Do we have unfinished business from anyone? Seeing no hands, I will turn it over to Jake.
Morning, everyone.
Okay, Barb's the only one on.
Just setting the screen share here. Great, thank you. Okay, good morning, everyone. First report on the agenda here is capital projects update. So we'll get right into it. We have a fairly full agenda here today. In terms of this presentation, I'm going to cover current financial assistance for capital projects. This is, of course, the more significant capital works that we're doing in the utilities department. There's lots of small things that happen on a regular basis, but these will be the major ones. A summary table of the project's costs and current funding. That's in there primarily for just to have a nice handy summary when we share these slides after the meeting. Update on the individual projects, which is the real meat and potatoes of this presentation, and then future projects. So as of the last meeting, we have 7 capital projects ongoing that we had obtained funding from various sources. First one on the list is the ongoing Black Pines Community Water System well project, which the committee will recall we've worked on this for quite a long time to get it going. The water metering project, of course, where we received funding from Strategic Priorities Fund through the gas tax, which has, of course, been renamed to Canada Community Building Fund, CCBF. Also, we received ICIP Rural and Northern Communities Grant for the Pritchard water system. And we're going to talk about all of these in detail. For federal gas tax funds, Pritchard Wastewater Plant, there were repairs to the rapid infiltration basin. Paul Lake Wastewater Plant, procurement of a rotating biological contactor, and Evergreen water system improvements. And just a note there about the gas tax name change. The, excuse me, the one project that we obtained additional funding for since our April meeting is the Blue River Community Water System. The board approved some CCBF funding, 129,000 for chlorination on the Blue River water system, and we'll talk about that. That project's also being supported by funding from operations budget and money donated by Trans Mountain Community Benefits Program. So this is a summary table. I'm not going to go through, not really going to talk about the table, but it's in the slides and you'll receive a copy of these. It's a nice handy summary of all the projects ongoing. The blue one at the bottom, that's the new funding. And we're going to talk a little bit about Vaping as well as a next project on the list potential. And the sum of all these totals just over $10 million. So lots of work on the go here. First one, we'll get into the details, Black Pines Community Water System. So you may recall we've did a lot of work to get through public assent early this year with a full-blown referendum, which fortunately passed and allowed us to finally move forward on this project as of April. Right after that, we commissioned Western Water to provide the geotechnical services for moving forward on this project. And in June, well, actually, sorry, I guess it closed in early July, but we put it out in June, a request for proposals for drilling to actually proceed with the drilling works on the production well. We had only 2 contractors showed up at the mandatory site meeting, and only 1 proposal received. Fortunately, it came in pretty close to budget. It's a little bit over, but certainly within our working limits here. And we board approved the drilling contract on August 19th for $290,000 and change. So the gravel pad works, we did some expansion on that working area in behind the transfer station. That was just completed on October 8th. And as we speak, drilling is ongoing on the site. I think we're down between 100 and 200 feet at the moment. And that'll be ongoing with production well testing following the drilling. And we expect that to be completed in November. So it's nice to see this moving here. Once this is done, we'll use the results of this production well testing to complete the detailed design and then move forward with a construction contract for the actual, the rest of the infrastructure. And this entire project needs to be completed by March 31st, 2023. That's the end date for the grant funding program. Any questions on that? Next big project, of course, water metering program, which we've been working on for a number of years now. This project is nearing completion. Last count, we were at 1,014 out of 1,050 total meters that will be installed. And the final few meters, part of the reason we're not quite there yet is the delivery of the final batch of meters is being delayed as a result of the world microchip shortage that's happened as a result of COVID-19. So it's impacting the supply chain for those specific endpoints that communicate to the cell system. This table here summarizes the meters planned. This number is slightly adjusted from the original, when we started this project, but it's pretty close. So 1,050 is what we expect at the end here. And we've got 1,014 installed, as I mentioned. There are 32 pits installed in Loon Lake that are just awaiting the meters to be installed. And so those are the batch, the majority of the batch that we're waiting on shipment from the factory. So, I should say the contractor is waiting on. So that's the metering summary. Good news on this front is the initial strategy, you may recall, I've talked about this in the past, was we had hoped to put about 70% of the water meters in pits at property lines, because that's certainly a preferred location. We don't need to have an appointment with the homeowner to go inside to do the installation, and we can easily access for maintenance or repair or something like that. So as the project's gone on, of course, we had a contingency fund in this in the budget for this project, and things have gone quite smoothly. So we've been able to start digging into that contingency and increase the number of pits that we're installing, because of course the pits cost about 5 times the price of an inside installation. So
So, Mr. Devlin, could you answer a question from
sure, absolutely.
Bill? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just was wondering on Maple Mission, I see they got 24 out of 24, which is good. Are those all pit type meters?
Yes, yeah.
They are.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. So as we've been able to increase the number of pits, we're targeting right now at the end of the project, we'll have 83% of the meters installed in pits or manholes, and only 17% inside. So that's really great news from an operational perspective, certainly. So we're continuing to encourage customers to take advantage of the free Ion Water app, where they can just monitor their water use daily, and they can set notices to give them an alarm if there's a leak indicator and that sort of thing, or you know, so they can keep track, see how their water consumption is looking. There's the link for customers. So when you receive the slideshow, if you're talking to any folks, yeah, you can always provide that link if you so choose. The substantial completion date in this contract was June 20 of this year, 2021. Obviously, with pandemic, that's caused some delays, and as I mentioned, the delivery of the last batch of meters is delayed as well. But the good news is we're under budget, so we're a little behind schedule, but we're well under budget. So we're really pleased with how this project has gone.
Mr. Quinn?
Thank you, Chair. Through to Jake. Some of these things have got a time frame that they must be completed by. Is the water meter project one of them?
Yes, the completion date in the grant funding program for the water meters is June of next year. Okay. Now there's another, I think it's 6 months after that for us to wrap up the paperwork on the project.
Yeah, the question is there's a shortage of chips for the meters at Loon Lake, I think you said.
Yes.
If that chip shortage shows up, are we going to be able to get an extension for that if needed?
We don't anticipate at this point that the delay from the meter delivery will be that significant in terms of pushing us up against that deadline.
Thank you.
Yeah. So as this project is nearing completion, obviously we need to set utility rates for metered rates, which we have not had in the past. And so that's going to be addressed in the next report. So any questions on water metering project before I move on? Hearing none. Okay. So the next project is the Pritchard Community Water System. This is obviously our big membrane plant that we're working on, and it's been great news that we got our almost just shy of $5 million in grant funding, and which includes 100% of eligible costs, which is fantastic. So we've commissioned WSP. Some of you will be familiar with WSP Engineering for the engineering and construction and contract administration services. So we're actively working away on this project. The WSP completed a pre-design report in May, and in addition to examining a lot of the smaller details of how we're going to proceed, they've confirmed that membrane is absolutely the preferred technology for filtration. So as you work through a design of a membrane plant, you get to a point where you need to know the types of membranes and the supplier of the membranes that are going to go into that plant in order to complete the design, because there's variation amongst the various suppliers. So it was necessary to secure supply and make a decision on the exact type of membrane that was going to go into the plant. So we've issued an RFP, a request for proposals. We put that up on BC Bid, and that closed on September 10th, and we received 7 proposals from that RFP. And so again, that's specifically for the membrane equipment that goes inside the facility. So a report is going to the board tomorrow to recommend award of the membrane supply and delivery contract to H2O Innovations for a price of $760,000 and change for that contract. And that's below our budget, by the way, which is great. Even with the some of the challenges that have happened with construction prices over the last year. So subject to board approval of this contract, then we'll be able to now proceed and finish the detailed design and issue a tender once the design and drawings are completed, issue a tender for the actual construction contract. So hopefully we'll have that out early next year.
Yes, Director Quinn.
Your chair through to Jake. After this filtration is imposed or built, is there still a requirement for chlorine?
Yes, there is.
Thank you.
Yep.
Really? Any other question?
Okay, I showed you a slide similar to this in April, just shows the location of where the new water plant will go. This large parcel is our property, and it contains the wastewater treatment plant, which is outlined in this black here, and this is the rapid infiltration basins, which we'll talk about in a minute here. And we've, in order to save a little bit of money, we also negotiated, Tyrone did a great job negotiating with this landowner here and secured a right-of-way through this property to allow us to connect in and out of the distribution system at this location here. So as you can see, it's quite a bit shorter than if we had to come up through the side of the wastewater plant site. Fortunately, we had a dedicated water main up to the reservoir already on this system. So you can think of it as essentially water bypasses out of that main, comes into the plant, gets treated, and then continues on up to the reservoir. So that's worked out well. Carol.
Director Schaefer?
I would just like to know if it goes from the raw water intake into there, does it not go off in the streets like Basin does? It goes off and then goes to the reservoir and then comes back down. But we get water direct from the pipes.
Yeah, in Vavenby, there is no dedicated main that takes the raw water up to the reservoir before the customers connect in. In Pritchard, we have a dedicated main.
Oh, so it goes directly up there, then comes down.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So they're a little bit different in that regard. So as I mentioned, Pritchard wastewater plant, rapid infiltration basin repair. That's been a longstanding issue where there's been a bit of treated effluent break out at the surface. You can see the photo here. This is effluent that's on its way underground from the rapid infiltration basins out to the river. So it's been treated and it's on its way to the river, but it's been breaking out at the surface. Not constantly, it kind of comes and goes depending on what's happening with the basins and the river levels. So we issued a tender for this in March of this year. We didn't get a single bid. And I know the contractor world was super busy this year. So we also had a fairly tight timeline there to do with the riparian area, which I think might have influenced the bidders. So, so we put it out for tender again in late summer, and we awarded it to True Construction on September 8th. So for $90,000.
Could you just halt for a minute? Agnes, could you tell me who my vice chair is?
Sorry.
Director, would you take over for just a minute, please?
Okay. Any questions? Thank you. Any questions of Jake for this, or you still have more on this slide?
Yes.
Okay, Jake, go ahead. Finish this slide.
So work is, I was hoping to have a couple photos of work commencing on this project. Was supposed to originally start yesterday, but it was bumped today. So work should be commencing today on site. So good to get this project going. Next project, I'm going to hand this over to Tyrone.
Thank you. Our next project is Paul Lake Wastewater, rotating biological contactor, RBC. So basically we're preparing for the failure of the existing RBC, which was installed somewhere in 96, 97. And the fatigue failure is a real possibility for this. So we went with a contract for supply and delivery of the new RBC with HANA equipment for $125,000 roughly. and it was delivered on site September 21st, 2021. And in the background here, maybe I'll just pop up. Sorry, in the background here, you can see the new RBC is shipped with stands and a marine cover to protect it from UV degradation as well, and put in beside the existing RBC at Paul Lake. So that's ready to be installed when we can schedule it. Any questions on that one?
Director Schaefer?
Are you gonna remove the old one in the end?
Yes, so the existing RBC will be removed and the new RBC will be put in its place. So the cover here is, this RBC is about 40% submerged in the wastewater tank. And so this one, which is obviously sitting above the ground, will be dropped into place. And it's a direct replacement for the existing one.
I have a question about that one.
Yes,
Why haven't you got it sunk right in the ground?
It is.
why?
Yeah,
So rather than putting it above ground, it protects it from freezing.
no, but you haven't got it right in the ground.
The
You
new
got-
one?
Is the new one going to be covered?
No, so the existing RBC, I don't know how to back up on this. There we go. The existing RBC, so the RBCs work where they are 40% submerged, 60% above the water level. So you get the oxygen to the bugs that are on the disc. So it's a big plastic disc that rotates around. So you want to keep it above the water level. If we had the whole thing down below and covered, you have safety issues with confined spaces as well to deal with. So the new one will drop right in here and be in the same cover and everything. The next project is the Evergreen water system booster system repairs and improvements. So in late 2020, our staff noticed that our booster equipment began to fail. We used to have a large hydropneumatic tank in this building, and it was starting to weep in various areas. And so the board approved $157,000 in gas tax for the repairs. We commissioned True Consulting to complete detailed design of this, as well as contract admin. And the upgraded works include a duplex pump system. So you can see this really small skid, actually, 2 small pumps and a control panel, plus our new master control panel, which aren't in this picture, replaced a hydropneumatic tank that was approximately 20 feet long by 6 feet in diameter. That was horizontally laid out in this building. So we have enough room in this building now for a couple pool tables. Not that we'd ever put them in there, but there's a significant amount of space and we're looking at different uses for that space right now. And this replaces that failing system. I'll talk a bit more about this project and some of the operational benefits in the operations update. This project is complete and it's working quite well. Next project is the Blue River water system. So we have 2 groundwater wells and no disinfection at this point. We received new conditions on our operating permit from Interior Health that required us to complete the 5 recommendations that came out of the GARP assessment, or groundwater at risk of pathogens assessment. So the main one that's outstanding is to install disinfection, and the cost for this, the estimated cost at this point, is $154,700. On August 19th, the board approved $129,000 from the CCBF, and the additional funds for this will come from the operations surplus as well as the Trans Mountain contributions. We held an open house in Blue River on October 6th, 2021. It was fairly well attended by the community. And these upgrades, according to our conditions on permit from Interior Health, must be completed by July 2022. Any questions on Blue River?
Did the people agree?
A significant number that attended the meeting. didn't. And they're going to take it back. So I imagine they'll be coming as a delegation at some point in time and all those kinds of neat things. I've looked at the list of people attending, and there was about 12 people out of 150 some odd connections that opposed it.
Yeah, so it was well attended and there was a lot of discussion.
It didn't beat us up too bad.
Any other questions on Blue River? Okay. Moving on to Vavenby Community Water System. So we received a land donation from Mr. Brian Fair, 1.5 acres, where the old Canfor site was, the former sawmill site in Vavenby, designated for a community water system, community water treatment facility. Thank you letter was sent on May 2nd from the board to Mr. Fair. And then we are also working on acquiring a statutory right-of-way through the adjacent Petrocan site for a future water main. This would allow us to, we'd see hydraulic improvements on the pipelines as well as loop a portion of the system within Vavenby. The next step, which has been delayed due to the fire season, was to commission a preliminary design for this to prepare for grant program. So our funding sources for this preliminary design are the Trans Mountain Expansion Project funds, as well as the Canfor Legacy donations. Yeah. And sorry. And the land costs, yes, they'll cover that. So preliminary design will provide the scope and costs and details for this for the future grant application.
Tyrone, why would the fire season delay an engineering project?
Because short answer, staff require time to get the RFP out for the preliminary design to get it out to the contractors to bid on it. And we didn't have the time with the fire season as we were tied up with the EOC.
Oh, yeah, okay. So it was our,
Yeah, it was on our end.
okay, thank you.
So our next one, Savannah Community Water System. We submitted the RNC grant application for the water treatment in October of 2020. And we asked for $9.14 million. This was the 100% eligible costs program. And on August 28th, 2021, we received notice that our application was not successful. So this project is going to stay on our list for possible future grant program applications. If any of the grant applications require the local government portion, we will require public assent prior to submitting for that grant.
I'll just give you a bit of an update on that. I was at a public meeting last night, nothing to do with the water system, but however, I did bring up that fact that we'd been turned down for that and what they wanted to do. And they said they do not want to borrow any more money against their taxes on a water, anything to do with water. So I'm assuming that we won't be going to public assent for anything until somebody forces us to do so.
Okay. As far as this filtration project goes, our preliminary design for it, we've secured some property where our current intake is. We've also secured the property across the highway for disposal of residuals. So it's basically on the shelf now, waiting for a grant program. That was it. Any questions on the capital projects updates? Sorry.
Oh, okay. Any questions? No. Okay.
Just wondering, Tyrone, what's the total projected cost for the Vavenby project?
So at this point, our estimated cost for just preliminary design is we're earmarking around $75,000 for that. As far as a total project cost, we don't have an estimate for that at this point.
Can you give me a ballpark?
Any idea?
6, 7.
Yeah, 6 or 7 million, somewhere in there.
Thank you.
We could be off by 6 or 7 million as well.
I understand that. I just built a shop.
Okay. All right, I'll turn it over to Jake for the next presentation.
Number 2, yeah. So let me try it. Yeah, we got to close the other one. Stop sharing. Great. Okay, as I mentioned in the capital projects slides with the water meter project nearing or just about complete, it's time for us to update our water utility rates bylaw. So this presentation, I'll give you this is a sort of this report has a recommendation at the end of it in terms of bringing the draft bylaw forward. So as I mentioned, the existing rates bylaw actually expires at the end of December this year. So the timing coincides well with the completion of our water metering project in terms of creating new rates to go along with the water meters themselves. So in terms of looking at how we can structure the metered rates, there's quite a variety of different options available. Some of the main ones, the most common ones are constant rates, what's called a humpback block rate structure, declining block rate structure, and inclining block rates, which is the most common. Essentially, inclining block you can think about is there's thresholds. As you use more, you can potentially pay more per unit of water consumed. So we've taken an extensive analysis to come up with rates for each of the water system. I've actually been working on this for probably close to 2 years. It's been a major undertaking actually from an analytical perspective, complicated by the fact that it's 11, everything we did was done 11 times over. So it's been a significant body of work to get to this point. We also commissioned assistance from 2 independent experts who are, in the consulting world who focus on rate setting as part of their sort of area of strength. And after looking at all options, we decided to go with an option that was basically simple for the customers to understand and relatively straightforward for us to administer. And of course, having 11 separate utilities is also a consideration there in terms of trying to keep it straightforward. So in terms of when we looked at how to structure the rates, what we were looking to do was to strike a reasonable balance between fixed revenue, which is generated from a base rate component, and variable revenue, which of course is generated from a consumption rate, which is, of course, is based on how much water an individual customer uses. So pretty much universally, where water meters are used in the billing for water utility, this is the approach. There's a 2-part two components to the actual bill for each individual customer. So the metered rate is the sum of these 2 components, the base rate component and the consumption rate component. So those combine to give us the metered rate, the bill that goes to the customer. Just a note that we're going to continue on doing billing on a quarterly basis as we are doing now. So no change in that regard. So in looking at the actual
I have
base
a
rate
question.
component, sorry,
I have a question.
absolutely.
Is the base rate the same, almost basically as what they pay now in the, on the monthly that they're billed through the regional electric?
No, it's different. Yeah,
It-
and I'll give you the specifics for each system here as we go.
So when we struck the base rate originally, we struck it on how much the consumption was within that water system. That surely hasn't changed that much that we have to change the base rate.
So without a meter in place, we've used what we call a flat rate, which it looks like a bit of it looks like a base rate, but the base rate is only part of a metered rate, where the flat rate is a fixed amount per quarter, no information at all about the amount of water being used.
But I'm basically, what I'm getting at is how much different is that base rate going to be against the flat rate? Like, is it gonna go up? So it's very significantly different?
So the entire analysis of this entire project to set these rates, the objective has been that we generate the same amount of revenue in a year as we do now. So the average customer will pay basically about the same. Customers that use less can potentially pay less, and customers that use more will pay more. But when we look at the average customer, we've bent over backwards to try to get these rates set so that the average customer will see little to no change
Thank you.
at the end of the year. Now, because there's 4 billing cycles per year and more water is consumed in the summer, then obviously there'd be a higher bill in the summer period than during in the winter period.
Right, Director Race?
I'm gonna thank you, Chair, and this directed to Jake. And I got an email last night, and it was forwarded to me from the chair of the SBID, and had some rates in there that were sent to her, which is fine. But I'm just wondering, as I was looking at the rates and the concerns in that email, which I have, is that rate, that it was the base rate, the flat rate that I think it was $3.95 a quarter or something like that, or $2.90. Anyways, it doesn't matter what it was. Is that basically what they were paying for before? Does it apply to improvement districts and entities like that? I know it applies to residential, but is it basically the same on that?
So each system is unique.
Yes.
We're doing each system individually, so I can't give you an answer whether, I'd have to go into the specifics of each individual system to give you the difference in what the flat rate is versus the base rate. I can do that. I can go pull it up.
Well,
here,
can we just sit down afterwards, maybe have a quick chat?
Yeah,
Okay, thanks.
yeah.
You bet.
And I've got numbers in here, so.
Okay, thanks,
you'll
Jake.
see that here. So just a little bit of a description here about the base rate component. So this is a charge that's based on the size of the meter that is installed. And this is applied pretty much universally. In other words, and of course, the vast majority of our water meters are the standard 3/4 inch. We call it 19 millimeter. So that's the size of the meter is the driving component, the driving factor in the base rate component. And this charge is applied as long as the water service is on. The base rate component would apply for each quarter for billing. And as I mentioned, the larger meters pay a higher base rate. On the consumption rate side, this is of course the charge per cubic meter of water consumed. And it's the product of, so whatever that rate is per cubic meters times the number of meters used, cubic meters used. If no water is used, then this consumption rate charge is 0. So if the water service is on and no water is used, the base rate would still apply, but there'd be 0 consumption on that particular bill.
Director Schaefer?
I'd just like to know how much gallons is in a cubic meter.
Good question. So there's 1,000 liters. And if you're talking imperial gallons, there's about 4.5. So if you divide 1,000 by 4.5, anybody got a calculator? Yeah, there's a difference between US gallons and imperial gallons. And in the water world, unfortunately, a lot of the information, that equipment and everything we deal with comes out of the States. So we are often dealing with US gallons. So have to be cognizant of that if you're reading something that says gallons. But so whatever that 1,000 was divided by 4.5.
There's
223.
223 imperial gallons in a cubic meter, and there's 264.5 US gallons in a cubic meter. Imperial 223.
Skill testing question. So if you can see it on the bottom of the slide there, the base rate component, this is fixed revenue that we know. We know the size of the meters that went in. We know how many of each of the sizes we have. And so there's known revenue for each utility based on the base rate component. Conversely, the consumption rate, that's an unknown for us.
If
We have a
can you-
reasonable estimate. Sorry, go ahead.
Can you wait half a minute about the larger the meter service? One of the things I'd like to ask is when we've got a meter service at 50 millimeters, which is, I think I figured it out as 2 inches.
2 inches, yeah.
And the rest are 1 or 3/4. Can we not change that 2 inch, well, I call it 2-inch line? And the reason I'm asking that is that there's 4 pieces of property belong to the community association. One of them is a 2-inch line, and I have no idea why I would have put a 2-inch line in there to start with. But because of the cost of this metering service at 2 inches against the other ones, is there some way that we can change that down to a 19 millimeter?
Sometime, the answer to that is sometimes yes, sometimes no. It sort of depends on the size of the actual pipe that the meter is installed on. It's common for us to put one size smaller meter. So say, for example, you had a 2-inch water line. It's common for us to then put an 1.5-inch water meter on it. So there's already a sort of but if there's a high flow rate needed, then for that property, if their demand is high, or if they have a large irrigation system and they don't want to constrict the flow through a reduced meter size, then that wouldn't work well if we put in a smaller meter. So in some cases, yes, I fully anticipate once people start seeing the mock billing and asking questions about the rate structure, they may say, hey, is there a way for me, can I get a smaller meter? And we're going to have to look at those on a one-off basis,
Okay,
individual
thank you,
basis.
Jake. I'm only concerned about the one that's down along the park because there's no irrigation. And I don't even know why there's a 2-inch line down there, but
Yeah.
it would make it a lot simpler on the community if we didn't have to pay such a big
Yeah.
rate for that. Can we look at it later? You
Yeah,
and I?
absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
We can talk about the detail on that particular service after. Yep.
And Director Schaefer?
If you turn the water off, is there still a base rate?
If the water is off, no.
So there'll be no base rate and then there'll be no consumption rate.
Yeah, it's same as it now. If someone
Zero.
calls and says, turn my water off, we charge them to go out and turn the valve off. There's a $50, I think it's $50 charge. And then we don't send them a bill until they call us and say, turn it back on. They just continue to pay the parcel tax though, of course.
Of course.
And there is an exception to that, and that's Loon Lake. Loon Lake still has a partial charge when the water is off because there's so few customers and the system literally cannot afford to operate with the high number of seasonal customers on that system. So.
Any more questions? Thank you, Mr. Devlin.
Okay, so these are the numbers that are in the draft bylaw for each system. So all 11 water systems here, and the base rate component by meter size. So the numbers you see in bold also indicate whether or not there are meters of that size on that system. So Black Pines, for example, you can see we've got the first 2 meters. We've got 19 millimeter meters and 25 millimeter meters in this table bolded. So those are the only 2 size of meters on that system. By far and away, the majority of all the meters on all our systems are 3/4 inch or 19 millimeters, 90% in fact. So Savannah, yeah, Savannah has definitely has some larger meters. You can see you have meters up to a 2-inch in Savannah. Yeah, so nothing bigger than that based on this data. So the base rate component, as I mentioned, as long as the water service is turned on, this is the rate that applies per quarter. And this table may not look like much, but there has been an incredible amount of work has gone in to come to these figures on all 11 systems. The other important thing to talk about here is the ratio. So in other words, how much does this base rate increase in cost to the customer as the meter size gets larger, going up the scale? The largest meters we have on our systems are, we have a couple of 6-inch meters out there, but again, there's only a couple. So the way we've structured this base rate component is that there's less of an increase as the meters go up in size than is common on most utilities. And the reason that we've done that is because if we have a few large customers on a system and they call us up and say, we're closing down, turn off our water. If we have a disproportionate portion of our revenue coming from those few customers, that could really put us in a jam in terms of in revenue. So in terms of risk management, if we lose large ICI customers, we've taken the approach that we're using less dramatic increase in base rates as the size of meters go up.
Director Rice.
Thank you, Chair, and to Jake. I was off by $1. It's $3.94. I was thinking $3.95, but looking at this, so it's sort of based on population. Is that how you sort of got for the bigger meters? Because that's obviously the improvement district there in Spence's Bridge, which I believe has a 2-inch and or 50 millimeters, obviously, and stuff like that. But I was just looking at Savannah and stuff, a little bit lower, a little bigger population, and Blue River a little higher. So that must have figured into how those numbers came about.
Yes, each system is looked at independently.
Yep.
There's no
Yep.
cross calculation.
No, I don't have a problem with the
systems.
number at all. I
Yep.
just was wondering if that's the way it was working.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the component, because the larger the service and the larger the meter, the bigger the demand that they can put on our system. And that's the rationale for obviously charging a higher base rate component. However, if you look up the city of Kamloops base rate component for a 6-inch meter, it is far more than a couple $1,000s a quarter. But it's very risky for us to put that much a reliance on a couple customers that if they turned off the water, we would be in a jam. So
I just wanted to suggest that the city of Kamloops on the let's say a 2-inch line or a 4-inch line are probably serving customers that are retail. In our small communities, they are not. They are serving things like a park or a community hall or some other, even the improvement district. So therefore, they have no revenue stream. I just wanted to make that. Yes, I know, Director Schaefer.
I would just like to ask, like that one for Vaping be at 559 on the 2-inch, that's 2-inch, right? The 50 mm is a 2-inch.
correct.
Okay, the 559 is the base now, the rate they're being charged now similar to that?
The rate they're charged now depends on the use of the property. It's nothing related to the size of the service.
Because I know the 146 is less than we're getting charged now.
Yeah, but don't forget, this is just a base rate component. There's a
Oh, I understand
Yep.
the water consumption, but I just want to know if the base rate for the 559 for the 2-inch, is that pretty well lower than what they're paying now or higher than what they're paying now? Do you know?
Again, it's I'd have to go look. It would depend on the property because there's different rates depending on the use of the property.
If it's commercial or whatever.
Yeah,
Okay.
like a laundromat, and then we, if it's a motel, we have a base rate for the kind of the main building, and then there's a charge per room. the number of beds and that sort of thing. So it's difficult to compare.
Director Gillis.
Thank you. I take it from what I'm reading that if at the base rate, there's no water included, no consumption included whatsoever. So you start paying the consumption rates the minute you turn the tap on them. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
I do want to make one small qualification. I mentioned that we don't have meters in Loon Lake yet, so that's why there is no rates in here at Loon Lake. In Loon Lake, we have an issue with water quality, which this committee has heard about in the past from complaints from the customers. And our recommendation to them has been to flush the water. And so in the draft numbers that I've got, and I can't finalize them until we get meters installed in Loon Lake and we start getting data, then we can finish this process for Loon Lake. My thinking at this point is that we do give them a chunk of essentially free water that's included for that flushing that we're telling them to do. But that's unique to Loon Lake.
Director Quinn.
Okay, Director Gillis's question confused me. If the water is not turned on, there is no base rate charge and no consumption charge.
Correct.
If the water is turned on, there's a base rate plus the consumption charge.
Assuming there is consumption. Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Okay, consumption rate component. So as I mentioned before, we wanted to try to keep this simple for customers to understand, not complicated for us to administer, particularly because we're running 11 systems and our finance department has to do each of these individually. So we're proposing a 2-block consumption rate structure. And however, we're also recommending that 9 of the 11 water systems actually have the same charge for block 1 and block 2 at this point in time. Now that can be changed down the road in the future, but to help keep things simpler for the customer to understand and for us to monitor and provide information to the customers in terms of this is what your bill is going to look like through the mock billing, that they will be informed what their charges will look like at the end of the mock billing phase when we actually implement meter charges. Makes it easy for that discussion with the customer in terms of, well, you've used this amount of water, this is the charge per cubic meter, and that's your consumption rate. So there's 2 exceptions to that because of course we have 11 water systems and I'm recommending that 9 have the same charge for block 1 and block 2. So that's the comment that I just discussed. Makes it easier for administration and billing. So in the future, if we wanted to increase the rate in block 2 to encourage conservation as an added incentive for conservation, for customers to be more aware that as they start using more water, they'll pay more. We could easily amend the schedule in the bylaw to make that change. So here's the nuts and bolts of our proposed consumption rates for each utility. The shaded 2, Black Pines and DeLauro, are the 2 exceptions where we've applied a different rate in block 1 than block 2, and it's inclining, so it's a higher rate in block 2. The other 9 systems all have the same rate in block 1 and block 2, as I mentioned, for simplicity and ease of administration at this point in time.
May I ask what the difference between Black Pines and DeLauro would be against the other systems?
Yes, good question. So Black Pines is the exception in terms of water metering. The Black Pines has been water metered, has had meters since I believe the TNRD took it over, anyway, a long period of time. So the customers there have been charged a metered rate, and they actually currently have a 4-block system. It's quite complicated and certainly not something we would want to recommend to try to manage 11 times over. So we're simplifying it in terms of making it consistent with all the other 10 utilities, but they're already used to paying more if they go above a certain threshold. So to be consistent in that regard, we're recommending that there is a continuation of an increase as they go into block 2. Deloro, the reason that I'm recommending that we have an increased block 2 is Deloro water demands are extremely high. On maximum days in Deloro compared to the city of Kamloops customers, their max days are in the order of 4 to 5 times greater per customer, like per parcel, than in the city of Kamloops, looking at max day. So,
And are they on a 4 block?
we're proposing that right now they're on a flat rate, right? Just like everyone else, because Black Pines is the only system that had meters previously. So
So their LLR will go to a 2 block system?
we're recommending a 2 block on the consumption rate. Yeah.
Director Rice.
Yes, and thanks, Chair, to Jake. So I'm assuming are we looking at like a year time frame, and then if there is some abuse going on after a year or something, we go back to the board and say, hey, block 2, we're gonna have to move it up a bit because we got to sort of address this conservation issue. Is that sort of the idea?
Yes, that is the idea. However, I also want to add that we had originally anticipated coming forward with these rates earlier. And what happened was once we got the meters installed and we started seeing real numbers coming in for consumption, they were significantly different than what we were estimating when we first ran through this analysis and just estimated what we thought customers would be using. And there was such a significant difference, not for every system, but a big chunk of the systems. We said, hang on, we better collect real data for 6 to 12 months. And that will help us inform us to make better decisions to come up with these numbers. So that's what we've done.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks, Jake.
Okay. Loon Lake, of course, the exception. Okay, so you can see there's variation here in terms of how much we're going to charge customers per cubic meter. And that's just a reflection of the different size of the systems, the different number of customers, and the different costs to operate and maintain the system. So,
Director Quinn.
Thank you, Chairman. So I did some quick calculations for a year for Blue River, and it would be for an average house $1,246. Does anyone have off the top of their head what they're paying now? That's assuming they use less than 285 cubic meters a quarter.
actually, I don't have it in my head, but it's in the slides coming in the
Okay, fair
presentation later on.
Okay, fair enough. I can wait.
So,
Thank you.
okay, mock billing. So, of course, we're going to get this bylaw hopefully to the board here in November, and we'll have it in place for January 1st. And we're proposing to commence mock billing first quarter of 2022. So as I mentioned, the exception here is Loon Lake because we don't have meters there yet. Hopefully soon, hopefully within weeks. But and as mentioned, we're proposing to continue mock billing for 4 consecutive quarters. So for customers that, as a vast majority of the customers have meters now, their mock billing will be the 4 cycles of 2022. We're obviously going to have some exceptions in Loon Lake, and then there's a couple other stragglers that may lag in behind or will lag behind that.
Director Quinn.
Thank you. Now's the time for the magic question. So the homeowner's going to get 2 bills, a mock one and one that he pays.
Correct.
What if the mock one's cheaper? Does he get, don't laugh.
They'll be happy because in 2023, they'll save money.
The question is, are they going to be knocking on the door saying, I want to pay this amount, not this one?
Well, they may ask.
Because I think that's happened in other places.
Yes.
That's why I asked that magic question.
No, I'm sure that question and the question about, can I have a smaller meter? Yeah. So as obviously the mock billing will inform the customer about their actual water use and how the rate structure would impact their billing after meter billing takes effect. And the regular billing will continue through the cycles of mock billing as before. So the updated or the revised bylaw attached to in the agenda, you'll see the schedules are quite long, and that's because we've had to essentially retain the old rate structure and add the metered rate structure. So we have both in each schedule for each utility. So that's why that bylaw is amending bylaw is quite long in terms of number of pages.
Director Schaefer.
You were stating that people might ask for a smaller water meter. At whose cost?
If they were asked, if they come and ask, like if they
For a
wanted to use their
small-
meter, well, they would have to pay for the,
New meter plus the taking out of the other meter.
yeah, we would charge them for the cost to make that change. Yeah. And I just want to mention, this is something that's not in your draft bylaw, but I'll make this small amendment before it goes to the board. And that is a statement that says any new customers that come in after November 18th, which is when we anticipate the bylaw would be adopted by the board, any new customers that come in would go on the meter rate right away, because they have no history, or, you know, essentially there's no reason to give them a mock billing because they're new customers and they can go on the meter rate right away. So that would be our recommendation. So there's several other housekeeping amendments in the amending bylaw, some updated definitions, which you can look at if you want. I'm not going to get into the details. They're pretty minor in nature. Some additional information in terms of what was under section 4 of metered services, and we've renamed it meters and billing. And we've updated some of the costs that were in Schedule A. Schedule A charges apply to everyone, where Schedule B's B1 to B11 are unique to each system. Schedule A charges are the same for all water systems. So if you call us up and say, turn my water off, then this charge is the same in Blue River as it is in Bay and B or anywhere else. So those are kind of universal charges in Schedule A. And that's it for the housekeeping amendments, and that's the recommendation.
Okay, we have a recommendation before us. Moved by Director Quinn, seconded by Director Smith. Oh, Barbara, Director Barbara, go ahead.
Director Barbara. Hello. Just a question. Just as people might come in and say my mock bill is cheaper than what I'm actually paying at the moment, what happens if someone comes in and goes, holy cow, look at what I'm paying right now, and look how much more I'll be paying under the water meter system? Is there any plan to, like, any way to work with them to say, okay, here's how you can reduce your water consumption? Just wondering if that might happen.
Well, we're certainly happy to work with customers to see, you know, if there's opportunities for them to reduce consumption. And of course, the question about maybe reducing the size of their meter, if that's something that works in terms of their individual property. We wouldn't be proposing to go back and revisit amending the bylaw rates, because it's a given that some people will pay less and some people will pay more. And that's the experience in every municipality or local government that's implemented, gone from a flat rate billing structure to a metered rate structure. So, does that answer your question, Director Roden?
Director Quinn.
Just a comment. It might encourage people to stop watering the street.
No, they like clean pavement. You know that. Okay.
Then they can pay for it.
This will be the bylaw then that goes to the regional district, and you've got the recommendation moved and seconded. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay.
Six point three.
All right, we'll move along with the operations update. Let's adjust this a bit. Run through department initiatives, touch on the community water system highlights, some wastewater challenges, and then what's next for the utilities services department. So we've updated our website. We have on here now when you go to our website, you have chlorination, turbidity, water permits, conservation plan, and links to these. One of the major changes that we brought on is we have our community water system service requests now as a fillable form on our website. So a customer can go on there and select water service on, water service off, provide their information, and acknowledge the conditions as well. So for instance, if they request a short notice turn on or turn off, which is less than 5 business days, then they could be subject to a 50% surcharge. So that's all acknowledged on here and submitted to us. It comes to our department mailbox and is then processed by our staff for turn on, turn off, and action taken. It's working quite well. Had a chat with a customer in Del Oro yesterday, actually, who usually calls in because they're snowbirds and they can finally go south again. And they usually call in and request their turn off for, you know, a couple weeks away and then turn on for when they're expected to be back. I sent her a link to this form, and within minutes, the form was completed for both the turn on and turn off. So it's in our system. We have a record of it now as well. It does also really help us align with our bylaw and requiring it in writing from the property owner for a water service turn on, turn off. So it's been a great tool that was added. Some other tools on the website, we have our system descriptions, much easier and intuitive to get to now for each utility, as well as a pop-up on our utilities services webpage that has current advisories. So this one was a screenshot from a week ago and shows a boil water notice for Black Pines and a water quality advisory for Loon Lake that are current. This is also attached to our Voyant alert system. So it consolidates all the information in one spot. And so far the feedback has been positive from the customers. We purchased a mobile generator that is sized to be able to operate almost any site. It can in some ways be adjusted to use at every single water utility. So this is with the fires we went through in July and August this year, we actually rented multiple portable generators or mobile generators, and they are not easy to come by when everyone else is looking for them. And sizing them appropriately is also challenging, where you end up with a 135 kilowatt unit where you only need a 60 kilowatt unit. So some challenges on the operations side that way. So we went ahead this year and actually just received this a couple days ago. This is a 60 kilowatt unit that's resides in our utility shop down in Mission Flats, and we're in the process of configuring it for all of our utilities. So the intent moving forward is in emergency, we have our generator available. And then if it's a longer term situation, we can try to rent one or procure one elsewhere. So our community water system highlights start with Black Pines. So aside from our groundwater well and that project, Trans Mountain, the expansion project, has been pretty busy crossing all of our infrastructure in Black Pines. I just threw some pictures up here. You can see the Trans Mountain line coming across one of our water mains, as well as another water main and road crossing here. So liaising and coordinating with their ground disturbance crews on going through our agreement with Trans Mountain as far as setbacks and whatnot. I took up a fair bit of time this spring and summer. Blue River. This is a great one for metering and impact on the water system. So this blue line here, and it's maybe a little bit blurry, but our daily water flow, so cubic meters per day, 800 cubic meters right up here, is where Blue River was operating at. So this is measured directly from the wells being pumped into the system. And up until, this is over a year, so this is from November until the end of September data. And then down here, I plotted a line to show how much storage time we have in our reservoir. So our reservoir size hasn't changed, but the amount of water that we use in a day within the system correlates to how much time we have, storage time we have. So as our system usage is reduced through leak detection, our storage time in our reservoir for emergencies also increases. So we've gone from approximately 11 to 12 hours of storage time in our reservoir in Blue River, up to 36 to 40 hours of storage time in there. And I want to say it's as simple as identifying leaks and fixing them. So this points to where our leak detection and our metering started. And we really started to focus on this, identified some larger leaks, homeowners and customers fixed them. And it's been continuing on down to the point where it's starting to stabilize now around the 300 to 325 cubic meters per day use. So we're using less than half of what we were 6 months ago now. And this is the operational improvements that we're seeing. The amount of storage we have. So if we go back to that portable generator and a power outage, a long-term power outage, we have 6 to 12 hours to decide whether we deploy a generator to that site, and we have an opportunity to assess whether that power comes back on or not, whether it's a 4-hour outage or going to be a 24-hour outage. We can make that decision with a whole lot more information now, and with a lot more confidence that we have the storage time in the system, and we won't run them out of water like happened this past spring. Just wanted to briefly touch on the disinfection system upgrade for our project for Blue River. So currently Blue River, the pump house where the water comes in through from the well field to the north, comes in through the system and basically directly piped out and in. And it was set up years ago for a filter system, which you can see here in the background, which was never used. So we're going to remove this filtration system, and we're going to assess the effectiveness of this filtration system for all of our other sites, and with the idea that we could reuse it somewhere else. But that frees up a fair bit of space where we can contain our chlorination. So we can keep all the chlorine fumes away from all the electronics and the wet areas. And it just extends the lifespan of all the equipment in the system. So I want to touch on that briefly. In Del Oro, we've had some challenges this year, mostly driven by the heat, as well as the large amounts of water, the significant demand on the water system. So our pump failed on the intake. The intake actually dropped onto the riverbed this spring. We had divers out that repaired that for us. We replaced the pump, and then we also replaced the drive. So this is a variable frequency drive that allows us to adjust the basically the power going to the pump, which directly impacts the flow of that pump. We were having some other issues, and we're still investigating it. And we actually had the divers reassess the intake on the 15th, this past Friday. So everything is good there, and we've bumped up our speed a little bit on our pump, and it seemed to have changed the characteristics of the system and how it's been operating. So just a picture of where the intake is. See the South Thompson Guest Ranch across the South Thompson River here. Evergreen.
Tyrone, hold on a minute.
Okay.
Sorry, I've been trying to get the chair's attention for a minute. Why is it that we have what looks to me, to my unskilled eye, like a pretty sophisticated filtration system in Blue River that has never been used?
So the filtration system that was put into Blue River, I want to say it was 1996, 97, somewhere there.
Around 1996, and that was based on the well that was originally designed,
Yeah.
and it's a sand filter, and then those wells collapsed. So we went further down towards the Blue River, and drilled another well, which didn't need it. And then we drilled a second well a little later, we still didn't need it, so there it sits.
Yeah, so it was designed based on the previous wells that were drilled. And the water quality is much different on the wells that are actually in use. So the filters themselves are designed for iron and manganese removal. But the canisters and they can actually be retrofitted for sand or ion exchange as well. So that's a project that we are actually undergoing right now, is to assess these to see what other system they'd be suitable for. So
Yes, Director.
I have a
Quick.
question on the previous slide where the divers are playing in the water. I don't see any marker buoys that says there's a water intake or anything. Is that required under transport regs?
not that I'm aware of on
Okay,
that.
thank you. It's just that if you got a cable crossing, you got big signs on either side of a river. And I just wonder if we need one or something there.
So moving on to Evergreen. So we still have some challenges with access to our water intake in Evergreen. We do have to travel through private property of a person who is not within the community water system to access our intake. Our negotiations to date have been unsuccessful. So we still have we're examining our other options for that. We've completed the booster station upgrade. One of the advantages we have now is that we can actually control our pumps at the intake. So the intake sits on the banks of the North Thompson River and is separated from the community by a railway and the highway. So we have to cross the railway and the highway, and then we pump the water up to the reservoir. And then we have a couple of customers on the system that are at an elevation so similar to the reservoir that we actually have to boost the pressure from the reservoir out to the system so they have adequate pressure at their homes. So the original system, or pre-upgrade, we had to actually physically visit the intake down on the river and cross the highway and the tracks and private property without a right of way or an easement to go to it. If a pump failed, or just to even assess how the pumps were operating. That is now, all the data from the pumps is now brought up to the booster system and then sent to our TNRD, our regional SCADA system. We can also now compare the water that we pump from the intake to the reservoir. We can compare the amount of water that we pump from the reservoir and boost it to the customers. And we can also look at how much water in total is being used by all the customers via our water meters. And the intent of this graph, which is fairly busy, is to show the relationship between the raw water, the reservoir water, the distribution water, and then the metered water. And it's pretty close, which indicates that the system is fairly tight, not a lot of public side leakage in the system. One of our concerns on this system is a leak or a significant failure between the intake and the booster station, which could impact the highway and or the railway. So we don't want to be undermining a railway or a highway with a leak from our system. So we now have all this data available and we can actively monitor it and assess it. Loon Lake. I know I said water system highlights and left the challenges for the wastewater, but we do have challenges in Loon Lake as well with our water quality that we've heard about at our previous committee meetings as well as board meetings. We do receive multiple customer complaints throughout the year, and we did install an automated flushing unit. This system at Loon Lake has minimal looping in it, so it has quite a few dead ends on the system. So basically our idea with the flushing unit was to try one dead end in the primary one and see how effective the flushing unit was in reducing customer complaints and or manual intervention. So our operator up in Loon Lake this year observed during his flushing that It only took them a couple minutes to flush that line to clear it out versus the 15 to 20 minutes it used to take them to flush it. So with all this, we intend to try and develop a more proactive or predictive flushing program to reduce the amount of customer complaints as an interim solution prior to a permanent filtration system solution. So this picture here is a picture a resident sent us of their water coming out of their tap. So with the iron and manganese in the water reacting with the chlorine and the amount of time it sits in the system, it will react and discolor the water. And then this picture on the right is of a meter pit install in Loon Lake. So public side installation and the restoration work done there on that. So it's hard
Director
to
Ice?
even tell it was there.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and to Tyrone. Has there been any consideration, and we did connected a couple dead ends in Spence's Bridge with some gas tax money. Has there been any consideration of, or is it even physically possible? I'm not familiar with the location to connect some of the dead ends and help with the system a bit.
Yeah, to loop the system in Loon Lake. It's been, I believe it was looked at in our master planning. Yeah, it's possible on some of it, and it's not possible without acquiring land on some of the others. So
Thank you.
Tyrone, how come, like water that is generally high in magnesium is gray when it comes out of the tap? Why is that yellow?
So iron will react and cause this color versus the manganese. Manganese typically goes black, right? Yeah, and iron will go more of the brownish red, rusty. So we have both of those in this water that react with the chlorine. So, and then it's typically it settles out in our distribution system, and then when the customers come in, the seasonal nature of the system, it'll get stirred up, and it'll actually reside in the line between the water main between the road and their home, which these are a couple acres. These properties are 1 acre large, and their homes are all located typically in the center of the property. So they have a pretty long service line to the property that every bit of pipe you add just increases the amount of time the water reacts with whatever's in it there. So Maple Mission community system. So similar to what we did in Blue River a couple of years back with the groundwater at risk of containing pathogens assessment. We're actually kicking that one off this week, tomorrow actually. And this is to satisfy the source water assessment requirement on the conditions of permit from Interior Health. This system's already chlorinated and has received multiple upgrades to address some of these issues. So this is just to see what kind of condition the well is in, as well as what type of risks are there, and if we've missed anything on it. This fall we completed a standpipe repair. So the standpipe is on the picture on the right here. This is what our standpipe looks like. It's essentially, lots of people call them hydrants. But the majority of these standpipes were originally installed with a PVC elbow at the bottom and connecting to the water main. So there was an incident a few years ago where one of those plastic elbows cracked and drained the entire reservoir. So we've been methodically going through and replacing them, the PVC elbows with a brass elbow, and the rest of the pipeline and the connection to the water main that way.
Director Kershaw.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Is that pretty well completed now? We've done most of those elbows out?
We have one left, I believe.
One left? Thank you.
Yeah. So while we were replacing this one, there's some odd plumbing and connections in there. And one of those connections happened to break as we were doing this repair, which caused us to shut down, isolate that portion of the system, which resulted in essentially pressure loss in the system. And we had to issue a boil water notice for the entire system until we had it repaired and flushed and had our bacteriological sampling completed, showing that we didn't contaminate it with anything. So that's some of the risk that happens when you're proactively replacing these things. It can still break when you're down there working underground. So Savannah. So we have our grant application was unsuccessful, and then we put a new service line in underneath the access road. So we've gone towards directional drilling to install service lines when the water main is on the opposite side of the road that the water service request is. And so this is a picture of, on the left, this is the mini excavator that we have, and we dig a pit here. And then on the opposite side of the road where the curb stop is installed, the drill will sit and they'll drill underneath the road, install a casing, and then we'll pull our service lines through there, make the connections to the water main, establish a curb stop, and the customers are able now to connect to the system. So again, these are new connections to the system. They also have meter pits for them, and or inside meters when they go to build and apply for their building permits. But this project is actually paid for by the customer who requests the water service. So unfortunately, for some customers, they have to cross the road, and others are adjacent to the road, and we can just put a curb stop right here. So and we've had this situation, same situation in Blue River, anywhere else. Ministry of Transport prefers that there's basically a trenchless technology completed to cross a road versus an open cut. And open cut is the absolute last resort. So if you can't drill it, then you can open cut it. So moving on to Spence's Bridge. One of the projects we've had for Spence's Bridge was to update the SCADA system. So the SCADA is a supervisory control and data acquisition system. It basically takes all the data from all the sensors in the system and brings it to one spot. So this one, Spence's Bridge was operating a standalone SCADA system, which required a standalone server actually in the water building, and that requires more maintenance and operation and updates. So what we did was we proposed that we tie it into the regional SCADA system that we're using, which this is it's a work in progress, but this is what our initial screens are looking like. So we have our reservoir levels for IR1 as well as the Spence's Bridge community system, our flow rates, our stop points, our volumes for today, yesterday, lifetime, pressures on the wells and levels on the wells for now. There's also alarming and stuff. This is I've been working on this for a few weeks. It's more of a winter project to finish this one up. So part of the upgrade, what we did is we installed our VPN appliance to connect it to our regional system, which is on a server in the main office on Victoria Street, which is, fortunately for us, handled by our IT department. So that removes the utility group from having to maintain a IT function. And then our intent is to commission the WinCC this quarter, 2021, and then we will decommission the iFix, which is the previous or existing SCADA system in Q1 2022. I should also add that we provide access to this through a secure site for all the operators in the field. They can access it on tablets and or their phones, as well as our partners in Spence's Bridge and Cooks Ferry. We can also provide access to them at various degrees of access. So some are read only, and some they can make adjustments to the operation of the system depending on their roles. So Vaping community water system. So our target, our goal has been leak reduction, and it is working. So right here, you can see a picture of our guys repairing a leak. I believe this was up on on Huntsbet Road area, just above the railway tracks there, off of Abenby Bridge Road. Excuse me. There was a fair bit of groundwater in there. It wasn't just caused by a leak, but our mains are submerged with groundwater, and then our guys have to install a new water service. So this graph here actually shows our 2020 flows in red, or orangey red, whatever, and then our 2021 flows in blue. So this is over a year. Again, here we start on the left, we start from January 1st. Sorry. We go back to the end of September. So just to show our seasonal variation, which blue is what we should see. Wintertime, low flows down around 85 cubic meters per day, increasing in the summer as irrigation occurs and increased water use, and then drops down again in the fall as the growing season and irrigation season comes to an end. So this blue line, 2021, is what we wanted to see. 2020 is what we don't want to see. This is indicative of significant leakage in the system, where we're using the 500 to 600 cubic meters per day. And this is all going into the ground and not providing a benefit to any customer. And keep in mind, this is January to March, April in here. This is actually higher than or similar to what we saw this summer at max irrigation. So this is, I think, a great example of what our water meters are doing, as well as what our crews are doing out there to address leaks and repair them. So Wallachine, I thought this is a couple of pretty interesting pictures to show not a lot going on in the water system itself. However, there was the wildfire nearby this summer, and this standpipe here that is actually serviced off of our raw water in the system prior to the filtration and treatment there was used by some of the structural protection units to fill up bladders and or provide the hoses and the sprinklers. Excuse me. This picture here is our older chlorine or building, and you can see what the SPUs were doing there, and some of the work that the fire departments and firefighters and BC Wildfire were doing out there this summer. So I actually drove out there a few times when we delivered a generator this year. Two of us went out there and dropped it off. I think we left around 1 a.m. but when the fire was starting to come over the hill towards it, and it was unbelievable the amount of effort and the work that the BC Wildfire and their fire departments were doing out there to protect the structures and everything else. And the communication was great with them as far as accessing utilities for water and everything else. So just wanted to put that up here because it was pretty significant impact could have been a pretty significant issue for Wallachine getting cut off by the bridge there. So moving on to the wastewater system challenges. So Paul Lake Wastewater, now that we have a spare RBC sitting by, our issues have migrated down to the lift station. So the Paul Lake Community Sewer System collects wastewater from all the homes, which is a discharge from their actual septic tanks. So the sludge or the heavier, larger materials actually stay in the septic tanks and are pumped out by the TNRD on a rotation of 3 to 5 years. The clear liquid enters our lift station and is then pumped to our wastewater treatment plant. In September this year, we actually had a pump failure on there, which seemed to be caused by a power outage. So it caused the controls on that pump system to fail. And there was also a communication failure. So nobody was notified of this. The alarming system did not work as the TELUS phone line was down. So it resulted in a spill, which was reported to Ministry of Environment and the spill reporting hotline. Fortunately for us, it did not reach Paul Lake. We our staff like to joke that we're happy how they plow roads in Paul Lake because they make large gravel windrows with the plows, which prevented this. It caused it to pool on the shoulder against that windrow versus creating a creek and a stream right across into Paul Lake. Either way, it is a risk for the department and the organization. So our next steps are to upgrade these pumps. Again, these pumps were originally installed in 96, 97. They are now obsolete. They've been replaced by a newer version. We did last December 2020 replace one of these pumps with the newer model. We have another one to complete, as well as procure a spare for the shelf. And then we'd also like to upgrade the controls, the PLC in here, as well as the communication, which is big. To get Ethernet radio communication between this lift station and the wastewater plant in order to get access to an outside line. So there is no cell service in Paul Lake, which makes it challenging when we're up there and troubleshooting and contacting suppliers and consultants that can assist us with the troubleshooting. So that's our next steps for this to reduce the risk of this occurring again. What's next for the department here? So backup power. Now that we have our mobile generator, we need to figure out how we're going to connect it to our existing sites. So we do have some utilities that have automatic transfer switches or manual transfer switches. And then it's a matter of actually physically connecting to those. That's in the works right now with our electrical FSR. Water metering, we have our outstanding installations to complete. As Jake mentioned, we have a shortage of the endpoints, and then we can complete the installations in Loon Lake. But we also have some stragglers that were missed appointments, unable to install, which we have to go through and complete those. And then, so as we demonstrated in both Blue River and Vaping, we are going to continue to utilize this data to identify the system leakage, as well as so the system leakage is both public and private side. Private side is easily identified with the meters. Once those are complete and every connection is metered, now we can start to look at the public side leakage. So what's between basically the source water, the wells or the intake and the customer connections, and start to assess those and repair those. And our asset management continues. So we have some great tools from our GIS department that our staff are utilizing, and we can validate our field info and we can fill in the gaps, which things like installation date, pipe material, pipe size, condition as well. So that's continuing on as well. Any questions?
Mr. Kershaw?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like to ask about the Little Fork community water system for the hall there. Is it up and working properly now? We're going to have a meeting there tonight, so I want to I don't need to be blindsided by something that was missed here. So.
Yes. So the Little Fork Community Hall, the water system upgrade is complete. We have our operator from Vaping actually visiting it twice per month and collecting the water samples. We're submitting those samples to Interior Health. We've submitted an emergency response plan to Interior Health, and we are now waiting on the results of those water samples to remove the boil water notice at the community hall. Yeah.
And when do you think that boil order might be removed?
I don't know. Sometime my goal is before Christmas.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of contacting Interior Health and getting the right contact there. So our small system drinking water officers have just returned from their mat leaves, and they are back. They've been back for a couple of weeks now. Mm-hmm. So this is an item to bring up with them once they get caught up. And yeah,
I know that would make them very happy.
They would, yes.
Is there any more questions for Tyrone? Director Schaefer?
I would just like to know this ion water. Is it on the TNRD website, or do you have to go in and search it every time?
The Ion Water app? or the Ion Water site. So the Ion Water site, there's, I believe we do have a link on the TNRD website to it.
Can't find it.
Okay, we'll make sure that we have it, we get it up there.
Other questions? No other questions. Thank you very much for your report.
Thank you.
Jake, are you going to tell us how badly financed we are?
Yeah, I can't say this is the best for last, unfortunately. Okay. Maybe with the screen share here.
Let me stick with us for a second.
Number 4. Yep. Yep. Okay, last presentation. This one is on utility systems funding review. And the committee will recall in April, we brought forward a recommendation to the committee and subsequent to the board that we undertake a review of essentially the financing for all our water utilities and looking at operation and maintenance costs, grant funding programs, and summarize the results and look at possible options to address the funding gap, which we kind of all intuitively know exists. But I've got some details here now. We didn't get this progressed as far as I'd originally hoped because we did spend a lot of time in the EOC this summer, but I do have results to share. This table is just a summary of what the average customer is paying on each system through a given year. Now, of course, they're paying both the quarterly charges, which is the first column here. So this is the average again. Some may pay less or more depending on their particular property and service and that sort of thing. And then parcel tax that's applied to each parcel. Again, this is average, and the number if a homeowner if there's debt being paid on a capital improvement on a system, and some homeowners have commuted that debt, they may be paying less. So this again is the average. And so when we look at the average for each system, you can see there's significant, we charge quite a lot here for on all these small systems. And this tables are sometimes hard to read. So I have this same data here in a graph, and Director Quinn, I think you had asked earlier about Blue River. What's the average customer with when including parcel taxes? It's between 11 and 1,200 a year. You're welcome. So if we look at the average, so across all our systems, if you again, we're just looking at an average of an average here. We're charging customers, combining the base, the rates, quarterly rates, and the parcel taxes, about $1,380 a year for water. So then when we combine, look at all the total number of customers on each system and how much revenue we're generating for each system. Of course, the larger systems generate, more revenue than the small systems. I think Evergreen is the least amount of revenue here. And in this graph here, the orange color here represents the amount of parcel tax, and the blue represents the quarterly billings, so the rates charges. So you can see there's significant, most all systems, they're paying significantly more for the rates than on parcel taxes. Of course, with Savannah, we had recently completed a significant capital improvement there on the distribution system and a large new reservoir, which was fairly pricey. And so there's a larger portion of revenue from parcel taxes at this point in time. So total of this, all systems is about 1.29. There's an M missing here. I'm not sure why, but it's 1.29 million. That's our revenue to run all our 11 water systems. So a big part of this work that we've been spending time on is figuring out how much revenue really should these systems have. And so the work has been based on sort of two major inputs. One is some excellent research that I've mentioned at a previous meeting that came out of Calgary, and they looked at small water systems across the country and what kind of funding is required to maintain and operate, construct, maintain and operate these systems sustainably. We also utilized our TNRD asset management information for the distribution system because this research did not include distribution systems. So we added that in and combined the two together to look at what is the amount of revenue that we should ideally be generating for our 11 water systems. You may recall this graph. This came out of that research that I just referred to out of Calgary, and I did show you this previously. It essentially shows how there's a couple of key things here. One is that this graph, the side here represents the cost per connection for basically for sustainable funding. And this is population across the bottom. And so what it shows you is as you have a larger and larger system, the amount you have to charge per customer decreases because you have the benefit of economy of scale. So the real challenges arise as the systems get smaller and smaller. We kind of know that intuitively, but this research is probably the best available information for Canada in terms of what the true costs are. And of course, there's a difference between surface water and groundwater. Groundwater often does not require treatment. For example, Blue River, the wells there are excellent quality of water. We're still required to disinfect it, but there's no requirement to filter that groundwater on that system. Sometimes it may need to require filtering. Surface water is essentially always requires filtration to meet 43210 drinking water guidelines. So this is a big part of the research that we've used. And what I've done is I've reverse engineered this essentially. The primary output from the research was to determine minimum service populations required for sustainable funding. As I pointed out in a previous meeting, none of our systems are large enough to have a customer base that's enough customers to generate sustainable revenue. So I reverse engineered it, and I looked at what is the required revenue on each system per year for sustainable operation, and that's essentially the output here. And I don't want to get into the details of individual systems. Really, what I'm trying to do here is look at the utilities service as a whole. And the total required revenue based on the research and our asset management information for our distribution system works out to 3.8 million a year. So current revenues about 1.3, required revenues based on this analysis about 3.8. So there's a huge funding gap here on our utilities. And this graph here demonstrates the difference here that I'm referring to. So again, here's our 1.3 million current revenue. Here's what I believe is the appropriate number for sustainable funding to build, operate, and maintain 11 water systems of the size that we have. However, we recognize that there are gas tax, well, now it's Canada Community Building Fund source of support out there and grant programs. So what we did was we said, well, what if we make assumptions about how much of our capital costs can be offset by these grant programs? Now, I just want to point out these numbers here, this 3.8 million contains both capital and operation and maintenance costs. So it's the whole basket. Now, recognizing that the grant programs help offset capital only, they don't help us at all in terms of operation. We basically did two scenarios. One, we assumed, what if 60% of all our costs, are covered either through Canada Community Building Fund or grants or that sort of thing. That drops, what our required revenue from our customers should be, or whoever, to about 2.48 million, sorry. Additionally, we said, well, what if we actually are more, highly successful and we are covering 80% of our capital costs through gas tax or CCBF and grants, and that drops the required revenue to 2 million. So these shortfalls now are in the range of between, I think we're probably in this vicinity here in terms of, our real success in terms of getting assistance for capital works. So we're in this range. So our shortfall is in probably between $750,000 and say 1.2 million per year. So then we, working with Doug on this, trying to look at what are our options here. Essentially we're tasked as local government to build, operate, and maintain these systems. And as a government entity, there's certainly a high level of expectation that, certainly from the customers, that we give them water that meets drinking water guidelines. So we went to the province and Doug's helped us out here, and we started looking at what the Local Government Act says, specific wording and that sort of thing. And essentially the interpretation is that it does not permit us to utilize, broader tax base from around the region, the TNRD, to help address this funding gap. The province, when we presented our dilemma here to the province, they came back and they gave us 4 recommendations. One was raise your rates, charge your customers more. However, as I indicated earlier, we're charging our average customer $1,377 a year when we include in parcel tax for water. That research that I referred to out of Calgary, it also looked at what household median income was, and that's how they were able to figure out how many customers you need, because they had to figure out, well, what is a reasonable threshold for people to pay? Like, when does water become no longer affordable? And there's some good research that comes out of the States and other parts of Canada that says 2% of household median income should be basically your, the range of what you should be charging, people for water, not beyond that. And if we look at 2% of household median income in the TNRD, that works out to in the range of $1,200 to $1,300 a year. So we're right there. So what I'm saying is we don't really have room to raise rates unless we're going to exceed 2% of household median income. Depending on which system you look at, this number varies, but we're right there in terms of charging customers. There's not really any room to just go and say, we're going to raise your rates more. The second recommendation from the province was to implement development cost charges or increase current DCCs. Certainly, we don't have DCCs in the TNRD, and the issue here is not development. That's not causing our problem, our funding gap. It's not related to development. Their other recommendation was, to amalgamate any other contiguous water services in the geographic area to increase your size of your water system to achieve that economy of scale. Well, that's not very realistic, because it's just, there's those that really don't exist. And, the last recommendation was to take over adjacent improvement districts. And again, that's not a viable solution. So the solutions they gave us were none of them worked, right? And so we said, well, we got to go back and talk to them and explain to them that we're still in a quandary here. What's the province recommend? So we had Scott was very helpful in arranging a discussion with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. And we basically told them what I'm telling you now. And, talked about the funding gap. We said none of the recommendations from the province really are viable. And in lieu of, what's the recommendation, and and our concern really here is public health and safety. That's what's really driving our work here, to make sure we have enough money to make systems to meet 43210, right? So
So Director Gillis has an incredible question, he tells me.
An incredible question. It probably is an incredible question, but looking at the cost of operating that Del Oro system, has any thought been given to simply buying water from the city of Kamloops because of the proximity?
Yes, that has been raised, and when we undertook our master plans for all our water systems, that was one of the items that the consultant brought forward. By coincidence, I worked 13 years at the city of Kamloops with a primary focus on water distribution. I'm intimately familiar with the city of Kamloops water distribution system and the challenges that would come to first of all, convince council to extend water system beyond city limits, to the cost to upgrade this water system, because the upgrade would commence down on River Street, because the distribution system out through Valley View and Dallas doesn't have the capacity to throw on the current demands on Del Oro, and also the high cost to extend the water system that much further. So yes, it was looked at, and the conclusion is it's not a really a viable solution for Del Oro, unfortunately. So the province's recommendation in terms of was essentially, if you can't afford to build it to 43210, your default is boil water notices. So
Director Rice has a question.
Just a quick one. It doesn't make sense to me. How does that, their solution is boil alert, water alert notices. That doesn't even address funding. So that's not really a solution to the problem, is it?
You're bang on, Director Rice. Essentially where we're at right now is we're kind of at a dead end. We're not saying we can't find another path forward, but as of today, right now, we don't have a solution or a recommendation to bring forward. But as I mentioned, we haven't had as much time to work on this over the last 6 months as we had hoped. We're still trying to figure out what options are there on the table within the constraints of the legislation. One of the things that did come up from Ministry of Municipal Affairs when I pointed out there are lots of costs that we incur that are not eligible under the grants programs because they don't meet their criteria. And they did open the door a little bit. And they said, well, send us some information about these costs, and maybe we can look at providing a little more wiggle room in terms of what's eligible and it is not eligible. And here's a really good example of a real issue that we have to address. Evergreen water system that we talked about earlier, the intake of that system is down by the river, of course. And to get there, you have to drive a long way through a piece of private property. And there currently is no right of way through that property. And the landowner is, at this point, we've been working for quite a while with him to get him to issue us a right of way. We're not getting a lot of cooperation. And so we're a good chance we're going to have to go down the route of expropriation. That costs money, surveying, legal, all kinds of other costs associated with trying to expropriate property. Can also, in addition, even if we have a right of way in place there, at certain times of the year in high water, that access is physically blocked by water. So we have both a legal right of way issue and a physical access issue. And there's 15 or 16 customers on that system. And those costs are not eligible under the gas tax or grant programs. So how do we fund that, right? These are the dilemmas that we're wrestling with. But that's a really good example of stuff that needs to be addressed, and we don't have a funding source for it.
Well, Mr. Devlin, I can probably help you with that. Because I'm going back now, probably 15 years, when the regional district decided that better take on water systems. We provided, I think, around $500,000 in grants through taxes of the regional district, because it's a service. And so we managed to float the difference between what we were charging those customers and what it was actually charging us, or that it was actually costing us. And I don't think we've changed in 15 years by your report this morning. Because by and large, we still need to take taxes to put it onto those systems to make them viable. And Evergreen was one of the things that we said, don't take the system on, but we did.
Yeah.
And so it has cost us all that time, nothing but money. So what I'm saying is basically over 15 years, although we got way more costs, way more utilities, we're still in the same little hole.
Mhm. Yep.
Didn't solve your question, but nonetheless, from my point of view, from a director, that I know that we put money into these systems. And there was at one time a motion by the board that we had to get to the point where these systems were not being taken out of general revenue. And I know that we've got to that point because we don't do it, but we still have a funding gap.
Yeah. Okay, that's the end of my presentation. If there's any other questions.
And Director Quinn.
Mr. Devlin, do the ministry people actually suggest boil water advisories? Did they actually suggest that to your face?
Yeah, my argument to them was, water systems, the legislation doesn't differentiate between a service that like a water system or a service for, say, a local transfer station that is being funded by the customers. And my argument to them was the problem here is that, first off, they don't differentiate between a small water system and what I call a very small water system. And because they classify a small water system as under 500 customers, and none of our systems, our real issue here is 7 of our systems have 39, an average of 39 customers amongst those 7. So these are very small. My argument to them was, if you're an engineer and you're designing a road system, you have what's called a level of service, and you accept that, say, for example, during rush hour, there may be more traffic on that engineered design system than it can handle, and you can end up with a traffic jam. And so in a way, it's designed that there are times that it fails. Water systems, though, when we're talking public health and safety, in my mind, at least, are a completely different situation, because we shouldn't be designing water systems to operate, most of the time, but fail other times. And so when I presented that argument, the response was, well, that's why there are boil water. So yes, that was.
It's fine.
And I was very clear to them, though, I didn't want them to get the indication that we don't appreciate the gas tax and the grant programs, because they are extremely helpful. We would be, I don't know where we'd be without those, but I didn't want to send the wrong message. But I'm still trying to find a solution to this funding gap issue.
Director Rice.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And to that note, it seems like these rural communities and stuff like that, it seems, the long-term solution, I guess, because you aren't going to get there in the short term, is policy, and to have a microsystem policy, microsystem being under 500 and stuff like that, because we're certainly not unique. We're more the rule than the exception in the rural areas. So maybe it's up to this board to look at that a little bit closer. And as we move forward, look at a microsystem and put it to the province and stuff like that. So they obviously do not have a business model to address this issue.
Yeah, just a quick comment is we're going to need some political pressure if we want anything to change after that conversation, because we're talking staff to staff there, but ultimately the legislation is the legislation. So we're going to need this group or the politicians to help us with the Ministry of Municipality or Municipal Affairs.
Okay, guys, use your political advantages. Thank you, Jake, for good morning's presentation. Does any of the directors have new business? I don't know how we could after all of that, but anyway. Director Roden, are you good? Okay, then I would entertain a motion for adjournment. Thank you. All in favor?